Hello students, today's topic is population and land degradation. Land is the foundation for all life-sustaining processes on the planet. It provides us with food and water. It helps us manage environmental risks such as floods and drought. It supports natural processes such as soil formation and nutrient cycling. In economic terms, land benefits billions of people, including a large proportion that depends entirely on farming and forest products for their livelihood. For all these reasons, it's imperative to maintain sustained and productive use of land. Yet, globally, 1/3 of the Earth's land surface is degraded, affecting more than 2.6 billion people in more than 100 countries. When land is degraded, it cannot support all the processes that depend on it. Some irrigated lands, for example, have become heavily damaged from salt. Every year, this cyanization causes the loss of some 1.5 million hectares of arable land and an estimated $11 billion in production. Since ecosystems are so connected, land degradation can have cascading effects across the entire biosphere. Erosion, cyanization, and compaction of soil can reduce the soil's capacity to regulate water. Loss of biomass through vegetation clearance and soil erosion produces greenhouse gases that contribute to global warming and climate change. According to Kemp, as population pressures mount, the degradation of arable lands in wide areas of Africa, Asia, and Latin America increases. These trends may threaten future food production capacity. In Africa, food production has already declined 15 to 20% on a per capita basis since 1970. And at least a fifth of Africans do not have enough to eat to lead healthy, productive lives. Although population growth is not the major factor behind hunger, population growth has clearly aggravated the grinding poverty and in some cases the environmental destruction that has kept people from growing or getting enough to eat. Now it is time to talk about what is land degradation. Well, land degradation is a composite term. It has no single readily identifiable feature, but instead describes how one or more of the land resources, that is soil, water, vegetation, rocks, air, and climate, has changed for the worse. The concept of land degradation refers to the deterioration or total loss of the productive capacity of the soils for present and future use. This is according to Food and Agriculture Organization. Such loss occurs mainly because of various forms of erosion by wind and water, and of chemical and physical deterioration. Another definition describes it as the aggregate diminution of the productive potential of the land, including its major uses, that is rain-fed, arable, irrigated, rangeland, forest, its forming systems, for example, smallholder subsistence, and its value as an economic resource. This link between degradation, which is often caused by land use practices, and its effects on land use is central to nearly all published definitions of land degradation. The emphasis on land rather than soil broadens the focus to include natural resources such as climate, water, landforms, and vegetation. The productivity of grassland and forest resources, in addition to that of cropland, is embodied in this definition. Now we move to types of land degradation. Erosion. The most common form of erosion is the loss of topsoil under the action of water or wind. Water runoff carries the topsoil away. This occurs under most climatic and physical conditions. Displacement of topsoil by wind action is more widespread in arid and semi-arid climates than under more humid conditions. Now, chemical deterioration. Chemical deterioration may consist in the loss of soil nutrients, that is mainly nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium, or organic matter, cyanization or the concentrations of salts in the topsoil, acidification, which may occur either because of excessive application of acidifying fertilizer or because of drainage in particular types of soil, and pollution of various origins, that is waste accumulation, excessive use of pesticides, oil spills, etc., can strongly reduce the agricultural potential of land. Now we move to physical deterioration. There are three types of physical deterioration. Soil compaction, usually resulting from the use of heavy machines on unstable soils or from cattle trampling. Sealing and crusting, usually caused by the impact of raindrops. These conditions make tillage more costly and impede seedling emergence. Waterlogging, that is the rise of the water table to the root zone of plants, caused by an excessive input of water with respect to drainage capacities. Subsidence, that is lowering of the land surface of organic soils, which can be caused by drainage or oxidation. Desertification. Desertification is a type of land degradation in which relatively dry area of land becomes increasingly arid, typically losing its bodies of water as well as vegetation and wildlife. It is caused by a variety of factors such as through climate change and through the overexploitation of soil through humankind's undertaking. Desertification has been neatly defined in the text of the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, that is UNCCD, as land degradation in arid and semi-arid and dry subhumid regions resulting from various factors including climatic variations and human activities. Now we move to population factors responsible for soil degradation. The causative factors. The Global Assessment of Human-Induced Soil Degradation, that is GLASOD, project has described the impact of damaging human activities into the following 5 categories. Number 1, deforestation and removal of natural vegetation for cropping or cattle raising, large-scale commercial forestry, road construction, urban development, etc. Number 2, overgrazing that destroys soil cover, causes compaction and fosters the encroachment of undesirable shrub species. Number 3, improper land management including cultivation of fragile soils, reduced fallow, uncontrolled use of fire, practices that result in the net export of soil nutrients, diversion of rivers for irrigation purposes or irrigation of inadequate soils. Number 4, overexploitation of vegetation for domestic use, that is the use of the vegetation for fuel wood, fencing, etc., where the remaining vegetation no longer provides sufficient protection from soil erosion. And the 5th, pollution caused by bioindustrial activities. Now we shall talk about population and land degradation processes. deforestation and overexploitation of vegetation. Deforestation is the permanent destruction of forests in order to make the land available for other uses. According to the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, that is FAO, an estimated 7.3 million hectares of forest, which is roughly the size of the country of Panama, are lost each year. The destruction of forests is caused for the most part by land clearance for agricultural purposes. Land clearing in shifting cultivation is largely driven by population growth through the growth in requirements of food and other agricultural products. Comparatively, forest clearing for pastures is a minor factor on a global scale, although it is important in certain countries. There are also examples of rapid deforestation for commercial agriculture. It is particularly occurring on a large scale in Latin America and Asia. The other cause of destruction of the vegetation cover is its overuse by households, mainly from fuel wood collection. To cover vital energy needs, most households in developing countries resort to free gathered biomass fuels, including crop residues and animal dung, but most of all fuel wood. When the annual use of wood exceeds the sustainable yield of wooded areas, forests and woodlands are gradually destroyed. This in turn triggers or accelerates soil erosion. The impact of population growth on fuel wood consumption in the vast areas concerned is direct. Since energy needs are essentially proportional to population, another feature of population dynamics plays an important role, namely urbanization. A first effect arises from population concentration, which makes the impact on resources felt acutely over a peripheral zone, which typically suffers disproportionately from deforestation. A second effect arises from change in habits. Urban dwellers frequently prefer charcoal to wood. This increases the impact on wood resources per consumption unit. Overall, population pressure is determinant in vegetation loss, especially in areas with limited land reserves and energy sources. In the high population density areas of West Africa, for instance, concentrations of demand for arable land and fuel wood lie at the root of resource abuse. It is in these areas that patches of desertification are the most visible. This is according to Goes and Steeds. Overgrazing. Overgrazing occurs when plants are exposed to intensive grazing for extended periods of time or without sufficient recovery periods. It can be caused by either livestock in poorly managed agricultural applications, game, or nature reserves. It can also be caused by immobile, travel-restricted populations of native or non-native wild animals. The only thing to stop overgrazing is to limit the animals' space to roam around. Excessive pressure on the vegetal cover by animals can be a crucial problem, especially in developing countries where rangelands usually are much more crowded than in the developed world. While livestock does not necessarily cause environmental problems, overgrazing can be a major factor in land degradation, causing half of the damage assessed in Africa and 1/4 in other developing regions. Cases such as the damage caused by goats in the Mediterranean area and elsewhere are well known. In Africa, the increase in cattle numbers and the decline in the quality of rangelands have been significant during the past 3 decades. Now, improper agricultural management. A set of improper practices has to do with the land extension. the main problem being the gradual extension of cultivation to sloping areas and in general to so-called marginal areas, that is previously left aside because of the fragility of soils or of other limiting factors. This is a common phenomenon in situations of land hunger, that is of high population density vis-a-vis arable land. Population growth requires the extension of interference into new areas and the subjection of these areas to the high levels of damage that follow initial interference. It requires the occupation of sites of lower resilience and higher sensitivity, for which existing management practices may be inadequate. This is according to Blackie and Brookfield. A different set of improper practices has to do with faulty intensification, shortening fallow, insufficient fertilization, excessive fertilization, or the various forms of inadequate management of irrigated areas. The chemical fertilizer has been used for a long time in the history of agricultural land. The impact of pesticides consists of the effects of pesticides on non-target species. Over 98% of sprayed insecticides and 95% of herbicides reach a destination other than their target species because they are sprayed or spread across entire agricultural fields. Runoff can carry pesticides into aquatic environments while wind can carry them to other fields, grazing areas, human settlements, and undeveloped areas, potentially affecting other species. Other problems emerge from poor production, transport, and storage practices. Over time, repeated application increases pest resistance, while its effects on other species can facilitate the pest's resurgence. Now we move to major practices for controlling land degradation. Terracing. In agriculture, a terrace is a piece of sloped plain that has been cut into a series of successively receding flat surfaces or platforms which resemble steps for the purposes of more effective farming. This type of landscaping, therefore, is called terracing. Terraced fields decrease both erosion and surface runoff and may be used to support growing crops that require irrigation such as rice. Afforestation. Afforestation is the process of planting trees or sowing seeds in a barren land devoid of any trees to create a forest. The term should not be confused with reforestation, which is the process of specifically planting native trees into a forest that has decreasing numbers of trees, while reforestation is increasing the number of trees of an existing forest. Afforestation is the creation of a new forest. Now we move to prevention of overgrazing. To avoid overgrazing, managing livestock on grazing lands requires graziers to be flexible and understand the complex soil-plant-animal relationship involved. To prevent overgrazing, taking plant growth rate, natural processes of grazing lands, and animal grazing behavior into consideration are essential. There are many styles of grazing management to choose from: rotational, mob, cell, or holistic. For example, it is up to the grazing manager to choose which one will work best in each situation. Whatever style is chosen, a well-designed grazing plan bases rotations on changing plant growth rates throughout the year. Now we move to crop rotation. Crop rotation has many agronomic, economic, and environmental benefits compared to monoculture cropping. Appropriate crop rotation increases organic matter in the soil, improves soil structure, reduces soil degradation, and can result in higher yields and greater farm profitability in the long term. Increased levels of soil organic matter enhances water and nutrient retention and decreases synthetic fertilizer requirements. Better soil structure in turn improves drainage, reduces risk of waterlogging during floods, and boosts the supply of soil water during droughts. Now we come to the conclusion of today's lecture. Population growth is imposing an increasing burden on world's limited and continually degrading natural resource base. The natural resources are under increasing strain. Even though the majority of people survive at subsistence level, it will increasingly difficult to satisfy the basic needs of a growing population even at present levels of consumption, and the situation will deteriorate progressively as the per capita consumption of resources increases. Population pressure on arable land contributes to the land degradation, thus affecting the productive resource base of the economy. The increasing population numbers and growing affluence have already resulted in rapid growth of energy production and consumption, and this trend can only be expected to accelerate in the future. The environmental effects like air pollution and global warming are of growing concern owing to increasing consumption levels. However, land degradation not only leads to deteriorating environmental conditions but also have adverse effects on the sustainable development and health of people. The considerable amount of both groundwater and surface water contamination due to chemical fertilizers and insecticides lead to various waterborne diseases. The growth of population is a fundamental factor in its relationship to natural resources, environment, and technology. There is an urgent need to control population and poverty, conserve and protect natural resources and the environment for healthy human beings. Well, with this, we come to the end of today's lecture. Thank you very much for watching.